maybe didn't have the fireworks that some people were expecting, but I thought there were some really interesting things that went on. In particular, obviously, the Mets. I was saying to you yesterday that we're the Underdogs podcast, and what the Mets are doing, I think, is really smart, but it's also the ultimate overdog strategy. It may not be replicable for any other franchise, but when you have an owner as rich as Steve Cohen, you can basically treat contracts as sunk costs. That's essentially, he didn't say, I'm picking up $59 million of Justin Verlander's contract as much as he said, I'm saving 20 something million.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially he's buying prospects with the Scherzer deal, the Verlander deal. I think if you have that money to spend, it's a fascinating and smart way to rebuild your team. I just don't think anybody else has that option.
Well, look, big picture, everyone who's smart about financial dealings or money or behavioral psychology or anything says one of the hardest things to get anybody to accept in any walk of life about any decision is it's sunk costs or sunk costs. Steve Cohen not only gets that, he flaunts it. You're right. He actually said that money's already spent when they asked about Scherzer and Verlander. So why not put it towards getting prospects back? Secondly, he's really good at figuring out ways to exploit loopholes in baseball's attempts to stop teams from spending too much money. Normally, you can't just go out and pay somebody $30 million to get a top 100 prospect. He just did it about 4 times, right? At least with Scherzer and Verlander. They got interesting prospects back. Third, to a degree, I certainly did not expect. The guys they got back for being willing to blow that money are actually promising. And the Mets did a really good job of identifying players that other teams didn't really think they needed, who would do the Mets a lot of good. I think I was especially impressed with the Verlander trade, right? They had to convince Verlander to go. Verlander already had dealings with Houston where Houston didn't want to pay him the money that he wanted, but he ended up going back anyway, and Steve Cohen took care of the tab. But they also got back 2 guys who were pretty promising. Drew Gilbert, who's at least a top 100 player, and Ryan Clifford, who has massive power. The Mets got a whole gaggle of teenagers, right? Which supplements their recent attempts to build it through the draft. But the draft's only gone well for them in the last couple of years. They've not done a great, outside of international free agent signings, they've not done a great job of developing position players. Well, now they have a whole bunch of them, and they just spent a whole lot of money to get them. You're not supposed to do that. He's really good at figuring out how to do that.
So the Mets, to me, were one of the fun parts of the trade deadline. The part that I did not find fun was I really didn't think many of the underdogs who have a chance here acted as much as they should have. Now, I say this with a caveat that because of the expanded playoff field and the elimination of the waiver trade deadline, right, that you have to make these decisions right now, August 1st, and more than half of baseball thinks they still have a chance to make the playoffs. So there just aren't as many potential sellers, but there's some really fun underdog stories that we've been talking about over and over and over again. The Baltimore Orioles, the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Cincinnati Reds, the Miami Marlins. And other than the Rangers, I just don't think there was enough aggressiveness for some of these teams to really stock up on weak spots for the postseason. And I get that, especially with a team like Cincinnati or Baltimore, that part of the appeal is building a sustainable team with these great farm systems and youth, but you don't know that you're going to be in the same position a year from now. You have a legitimate chance to win something. I'm a little disappointed they didn't do more to bolster.
So I think there's 3 groups of these teams. One, yes, Baltimore, Tampa used to be like this, but Cincinnati definitely. I think it's really hard once you fall in love with the young players you've developed to want to deal prospects for supplementary talent. I don't know if it's hard to be good at both of those things at the same time. Also, once you're Baltimore or Cincinnati, other teams are going to come calling for Gunnar Henderson or Christian Encarnacion Strand. Like, they're going to want players who you don't want to deal. So I think they're psychologically not in an easy spot. However, there are other teams that are not far out of the pennant race who should have been far more aggressive, and it's hard to understand what the hell they're doing. What are the Cleveland Guardians doing? They trade Ahmed Rosario for Noah Syndergaard, below replacement level pitcher at this time. Jordan, quick, who's Cleveland going to play at shortstop? They don't have a shortstop. Why did they deal their starting shortstop away for a pitcher who doesn't have it anymore? I'll tell you why. Because they traded their best starting pitcher, or one of their 2 or 3 best starting pitchers, for a first base prospect from Tampa, Kyle Manzardo, who doesn't have any power. What are they doing? They signed Josh Bell and Mike Zunino this year. They thought that was going to take them over the top. When it didn't, they decided to what? Cash it in, not compete? What are they, a game and a half out of first place behind Minnesota? Like, you're right about that. There are some teams that are confounding in their reluctance to be aggressive just at the time when it should be easier than ever for them to compete in their divisions. I
mean, Rosario's
Cleveland bombed out.
Rosario's also been playing below replacement level. So it's not like they obviously don't think he's very good. So I have, again, you and I differ. I have no problem with teams selling. No one knows their own team better than themselves. If you're not good enough, that's one of the toughest decisions to make, but you have to have conviction about it. It's one of the reasons I'm disappointed in the Yankees, because you and I can look at the Yankees and say they're not good enough. But I don't know if they were just holding on to these pieces, hoping for a return that wasn't possible. But there are pieces they could have sold off pretty easily and gotten some influx of young players. So, yeah, I think getting Noah Syndergaard back is super weird. But I love the Savali trade with Tampa for Cleveland. I think they have to continue to be, with their payroll, smart and honest with themselves about where they stand. And in that division, you can turn things around very quickly, unless you're the Kansas City Royals.
Well, right. By the way, the Royals trade another team that makes their trades make no sense, and their player development is horrible. Wake me up when MJ Melendez hits 225. Okay. I mean, these players come up, have a little bit of hope for them. Hope is Kansas City, whereas hope for prospects goes to die. But that's an ancillary point. Jordan, what I'm concerned about is the team smart enough to do what you're talking about? Maybe clustering in large market areas. Like, we love Baltimore and Cincinnati because they've been able to maintain that small market mentality, budget, and prospect development all at the same time. But I think the teams that are best at picking up other teams' used or spare parts and converting them into really high value are actually the Dodgers and the Yankees. And if they don't want to go for it, they think it's because their roster is either filled out enough already or because this is not the right year to go for it. I mean, the Yankees probably think right now, with Aaron Judge hurt and all the injuries they've had, if they win 89 games and either make or don't make the playoffs by one game, it's a pretty good season. Their fan base is completely opposite minded to that, but I don't think that's wrong. I think they were pretty smart. What big changes are you going to make to the Yankees? Now, the Dodgers picked up a couple of guys whose stats look terrible, and I guarantee you that they will improve with the Dodgers, right? Lance Lynn last night looked better than he had in his last 15 starts with the White Sox. There's some teams that know how to fix players whose numbers say they're garbage. I don't think Cleveland or Kansas City are those teams. I think the Dodgers and the Yankees are. The Yankees just didn't add anybody like that this time around.
Yeah, you don't need much to tell me that this Yankee team isn't good enough to even make the playoffs, let alone do anything when they get there. And to me, they had success in 2016 selling off bullpen pieces. Teams are always looking for bullpen arms at this time of year. And we found that, year to year, there's fluctuation in that skill set. And if you can sell high on guys like that, the Yankees have a history of developing relievers. I think it's important they start to get some young position players in their system. But
their bullpen's already pretty good. They need a starting catcher. They need a starting third baseman.
No, they don't.
They need Volpe to play. They need Volpe to play better.
I'm writing off this year. I'm saying get rid of, trade Clay Holmes, trade Wandy Peralta. You can find more bullpen arms next year, write off this season, and get some young talent, because I'm sorry, they're not good enough. They have no one in left field. DJ LeMahieu was a shell of himself. They don't have a catcher. Stanton and Rizzo. It's gross. It's gross.
That's what's really interesting about that is that means they're not just constrained by what the fans believe, which is that Hal Steinbrenner won't let them spend enough money. They're actually constrained by what the fans think and do, because the Yankees cannot afford to be open sellers. They can't cash in on this season yet. They can't write it off. Yankees are not actually allowed to write off a season. That's fascinating.
I think that's a false narrative. I think people were fine when they did it in 2016, and I think people would be fine if they did it if they saw the light at the end of the tunnel of some of these guys no longer being on the roster going forward. Peter, did you know that other than Aaron Judge, they have no one in their everyday lineup with an OPS above 800? It's unbelievable. They can't hit. But
at least they don't have Dan Vogelbach batting fifth. I do want to mention one other category of teams which we saw actually have some success. teams like Pittsburgh, who signed veterans for 1-year contracts, planning to deal them off, and then did deal them off. I thought the Pirates made some intelligent moves, and I think they could be the next team breaking out in that division with some young talent. Their 1-year rental policy, which is hard to stick to. I mean, if you sign a Carlos Santana and he's better than expected and people like him, and you don't have anyone else on the team that anybody knows, sometimes it's hard to get value for somebody like that. But they did in a couple of places.
Real quick,
Milwaukee too,
okay.
Added a couple of on-base guys,
yep.
which I think could be a big difference for that team.
Real quick, in light of the trade deadline, anyone popping up as an underdog World Series contender that you weren't thinking of before?
That I wasn't thinking of before. I like Texas more than I did before but I mean, they were already a contender, but
they're still plus 1,100. I support that pick,
and they're going for it.
Yep. Yeah. Rangers plus 1,100. I'm with you.